A dozen or so men in the streets of Ozoro. But invisible, in the middle of this group, is the young woman who they have just dragged from her motorcycle. And she was not the only woman who was brutally attacked by the mob under the guise of a traditional event. There are other survivors in this community who were attacked and filmed as bystanders watched, like in these stills. I went to meet the survivor of this attack. We are calling her Omote to protect her identity, and I've revoiced her audio. She told me that she was still suffering from what the men did to her on that day.
I have not been able to sleep well. If I am sleeping, I will be shouting. My mom prays with me before I go to bed. I am traumatized and have not been feeling too well. I don't like thinking about it or seeing the videos because it makes me feel more traumatized and I don't think it's good for my health.
The trauma has left Omote with deep scars, but she is determined that her assailants must be brought to justice.
I need medical care. I also want those people that were involved or responsible for this act to be prosecuted.
Beyond that, Omote didn't feel able to tell the details of the attack. But speaking to an activist, she gave details of her ordeal, and she has given us permission to use this testimony.
I was about to come down from the bike when a lot of guys started shouting, "Make una hold her! Nagel! Nagel! You people should hold her!" I tried my best to run, but I was not able to escape. They started dragging my clothes. Different boys were just dragging my breast, my body, putting hands in my trousers.
Gender activist Ejiro Omukoro is the person who Omote was able to open up to. She is from the district and has been in contact with some of the other survivors.
What happened at the Ozoro festival was an abomination against our maidens. In Isoko culture, belief systems and values and festivals, the maidens are respected.
I tried to get reactions on the streets of Ozoro, but all the men my team approached refused to talk to us. But this food vendor, Christian Favor, was harassed on the day of the festival. She says what happened in the community was a clear case of sexual violence.
Even me myself, I was chased away from my business area. It should happen. It should not happen again. If anybody try to do such a thing, they should get them arrested and they should pay for their crime. The government should protect the women of Ozoro, the ladies, the girls, the students that are involved.
At least 6 victims have been identified, and they are all students of this university. The notice of the fertility festival was written in the local language of the community, which made non-indigenous to be unaware of the event. Authorities have promised that the victims will get all the support they need in order to heal from the trauma.
But there are questions hanging over how well placed the authorities are to help survivors of this sexual violence. The police say that investigation is ongoing.
What happened was bad. Nobody is encouraging it, but it was not a case of rape as it was alleged on social media. However, the clear case of sexual assault, indecent assault, harassment that those girls encountered, we are investigating it. We are not relenting. The video analysis is being processed. We are on it. We are trying to identify as much people as we can.
Gender activist Ejiro Omukoro wants the sexualized violence in Ozoro to trigger a debate and bring change across the country.
We cannot allow this kind of behavior to continue in Ozoro or anywhere in Nigeria, because we have seen similar festivals where this kind of behavior have been exhibited, they've been caught, and then everybody forgets about them, and then you see another resurgence again. The reason it keeps perpetuating is because there's not enough consequences on the perpetrators, the abusers.
At least 18 men have been arrested, aged between 17 and 25 years. As Nigerians continue to call for justice, survivors of gender-based violence like Omote are left hoping for a more inclusive society where women and girls will feel safe.
You saw Ejiro Omukoro in that report. She is the founder of an initiative for the protection of women in Delta State. I asked her what she had heard from survivors in Ozoro.
So what I found out is that there is an underlying mentality that, in a manner of speaking, is enabled by men, perpetuated by men, encouraged by men, endorsed by men, and enforced by men. In other words, the concept of young men thinking that they can be enforcers against young women in a society where the festival says that because it's meant for married women and young women are not supposed to be there, they put upon themselves, gave them themselves the permission to be enforcers of a consequence that was never stated in the tradition itself. In other words, the idea of a manosphere where men think that they can enforce punishment on women who are single, where the festival says they should not be allowed. Remember, this is an old age festival that says this is our practice. And some men who perpetuated the idea that they should be enforcers or punishers of young women who happen to be at that event should be meted out to them, which was never actually the original design for such a fertility festival.
Right. And I want to get your thoughts on what a police officer said about the incident. And as we heard him in our report, he said that what happened was bad, his word. He said that it was sexual assault, indecent assault, and harassment, again, his words. But then he goes on to say, but it was not rape. How is rape defined in the law in Nigeria? And does the Constitution need amending then in this regard?
So according to the Nigerian Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, it clearly states that rape is defined where penetration occurs. But we've also seen where different states in Nigeria who domesticated the VAP Act are also coming out to say that, look, in this VAP Act, this is our interpretation and this is the extent we're going to apply it. In some cases, it is even clearly stated that if there is no consent and there is coercion, there is threat, there's intimidation, there is force, right? Where a man or a group of guys decided that they are going to physically touch a woman in her very special parts, right? In the areas that is dedicated for our own personal privacy, as we all know what they are. If you touch them, if you grope it, that can be considered as rape. Generally, the VAP says that it is sexual assault in this context. And that's why we are advocating at Lightrail Media for the protection of women. We are saying that, look, this law, the way it's going to be affecting young people is that it is subject to the interpretation of different states. But we want a more uniform decision and review of the VAP Act to show that the fact that consent does not occur and a man trespasses not just an attempted sexual assault, as we have seen, and the law states very clearly that attempted sexual assault, either by an individual through threats, force, coercion, or whatever means that they demand it. And then you have guys, a group of boys or young men who gather together to also engage in this act. To some extent, if care is not taken, depending on who is handling the case at the court, can actually make a case for rape in certain circumstances. And this is the review that we need to be more universal nationwide across Nigeria.
Right. In our report, you alluded to the fact that men who violate women get away with it in Nigeria, if I could loosely quote you. Why is the system in Nigeria failing women in this way?
So you must understand that the context is also a global problem in terms of the misogynistic and patriarchal mindset that has been perpetuated even through religion. Now, Christianity and Islam, as the case may be, actually give men permission to punish, to discipline, and to bring to submission their women. Those kind of psychology merged together with a culture that says women can be excluded. Young ladies, for example, can be excluded, whereas young men aren't excluded. You have to ask yourself, in a situation where a festival, fertility festival, is for married couples, young men have no business, young unmarried men have no business being there, same as young unmarried women or girls in this context. So we need to see the situation whereby we have to address these issues, this incompatibility where religion is an enabler. Then two, we're now dealing with the so-called manosphere where you have the alpha male red pill conversation where podcast is enabling young men to think that this is normal. We have a situation where sexual explicit materials are accessible to young boys. We have a situation where men actually have a narrative. If you look at the deity in Africa, it actually enables, and not just in Africa, look at every form of deity worship. There's a high level of hedonism. There's a high level of subtlety that allows men to actually go and take a woman because they feel they have a right to a woman's body. Is this mentality, is this mindset towards the tendency to own a woman's body that leads to the idea that somebody as a man or young boy can sexually assault a young woman or sexually rape a woman, as the case may be?
Right. I mean, I'll just point out here, Ojiro, that there are probably a lot of people who would disagree with your representation of religion, particularly Christianity and Islam, that you singled out. But I think it's clear to everybody that these are your personal views. And how are the courts responding to these cases? Do we see perpetrators face the might of the law? Do victims get justice?
We're not getting enough justice as it is. The law is very slow. Prosecution is not as speedily like an expert judgment that one would love to see happen. We have not even seen enough of the sexual gender register because there's an offender registry that we have. We need to update those ones. We need to put in this documentation of those who have been persecuted and found guilty and sent into prison for these crimes that they commit. We also need to amplify those who have committed these offenses to the point where it becomes obvious to any young man that, look, this behavior is not condoned because it is an abomination to go after maidens. It is an abomination to violently maltreat another human being. It is an abomination to think you can get away by hitting somebody or assaulting someone. So we need to also go back to our schools. And I think parents are failing. And the law actually says that if parents also fail in this aspect, the parents will also be held accountable for the misbehavior of their children. So we need to see more enforcement against parents who have failed in parenting. We also need to see a situation where even in so-called religious settings and social settings, this conversation is not endorsed. I have seen men, I have been in circumstances where until I conscientize the men to know that suppose this happened to your daughter, would you tolerate it? Until I raised it in that manner, often they justify the heinous crimes committed by the men. And then they shift the blame of accountability to young women and women generally, that women are supposed to avoid themselves from being in such circumstances. Meanwhile, the law clearly states that you cannot segregate and deny somebody's movement and right to making connections along their own community. While in a more advanced society, it's a cosmopolitan world, the laws have changed, it's enough, and I'm glad that the monarch of Ozoro had actually right on the mark, 48 hours, condemned the action and then banned that particular festival because it has been hijacked by criminal elements who wanted to use a good intended festival to actually perpetuate not only criminal assault, but also the act of gang raping, gang molestation, and sexual assault and other forms of aggravated violence against young women and girls as soft targets in this context.
All right, well, Ojiro Umukoro, we really appreciate the time you spent helping us understand the scourge of sexual violence against women and girls in Nigeria. We appreciate your work and the time you spent with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.